In this special edition of Garden Talk with the Tulsa Master Gardeners, we'll repeat some of our most popular topics from 2019. Happy holidays and welcome to Garden Talk.
Welcome to this edition of the Tulsa Master Gardener podcast. We're glad you're here. Tom Ingram, Brian Jervis, glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this will be the final one for the year, the last one of the season, and we've had a great time, and we've really enjoyed the feedback we've gotten from you, all the questions. Keep the questions coming. Yep. We may use them on air, but either way, it may help serve as a topic we need to talk about if we get questions about something. So keep that up. YouTube, you can find us on YouTube and on Facebook and on our webpage. But we appreciate you all, and we've had a really good time.
Kind of stumbling through this, but it's working well.
Figuring it out as we go.
It is. We hope to have a lot of information for you, and we have, I think, a lot of good topical information. Length was always a question. How long do we make this thing? I think the first one we were a little over an hour, and then this last one we taped was probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So we're kind of bouncing in and out of there, and we're getting the information out, and hopefully it's good, timely information. So, yep, that's what we're after.
So this week's episode, what we're doing, rather than have a whole bunch of new topics, we're going to do kind of maybe a retrospective and show some of the most popular topics from this year, from the season, because we've had some that have just kind of skyrocketed in views and questions, etc. So we'll combine those down to one episode. It serves as kind of our end of the year remembrance of season one, I guess.
Or outtakes. I mean, there's a few outtakes.
We probably won't use the outtakes unless this becomes an outtake. We may use that. But anyway, so we appreciate you all. We got our hats on. Happy holidays, and we will see you in 2020.
Sounds good. Happy gardening.
Happy holidays from the Master Gardener podcast crew.
I don't know how many calls and things we get about this particular pest, but this is predominant. This is it's Crape Myrtle bark scale, right?
Crape Myrtle bark. We love our Crape Myrtles here in Tulsa, and most southern states, and this area of the country has Crape Myrtles. Right now during the summertime, it's one of our main blooming flower plants.
And they're beautiful.
They're awesome. Different colors, different shapes, different sizes. Right. But we've got what we're calling a Crape Myrtle bark scale that's been attacking it.
Right.
Yeah, so on the picture here, good photo we've got. Basically, this is pretty common of what we're seeing. The main thing homeowners are going to see, they're going to see this black sooty mold. And that sooty mold we'll get into later, but what that's caused by is by this actual scale. It's a felt scale, Tom, kind of different than a lot of our hard scales or our clam type shell scales that we have. Control's similar, but it's called a felt scale.
Well, a felt scale, does that have to do, I've heard you, in the diagnostic process, you can actually squish them, and if it comes out pink, that's a kind of a confirmation that this is.
It is. If you go to the next slide, you can actually see the little critter with a microscope, and under each one of those white cottony coverings are a lot of little babies out there. So each one of these, a lot of babies. So they lay their eggs. Those babies grow underneath that protection of that felt, and then they come out to feed. So if you go back, I hate to keep going back on you, but so you see the white covering. Inside that's that pink goo that you was talking about, those pink insects.
The babies, yeah. So we're looking there and we see, a couple of hundred scales, but inside each of those scales there's more
little babies that are continuing their life.
1,000 or more.
That's right. That's right. Wow. So and they're all protected. Each one of those, they're feeding. As a lot of sucking insects, as they take in juices, they've got to excrete some. So they excrete a product called honeydew. It's a sugary substance that falls off. You may have seen it on your cars when you park underneath trees. You get kind of sticky stuff.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, kind of nasty. So what's happened on this leaf, that sugary substance fell on that leaf.
Right.
And then a sooty mold, a mold fungus.
I think we've got a better picture of that mold.
Yeah, so a mold has attacked that sugary substance, causing it black.
Yeah, that doesn't look very healthy.
It doesn't. It's not too bad on it,
right.
Just really bad on appearances. But the black is the telltale sign, and that's what we're going to start seeing a lot coming up later on this fall.
So the black mold, I've heard it attracts ants. Do ants get in there with the honeydew. They like the honeydew as well.
It is. Another sign that you may have a scale insect, and crepe myrtle bark scale will fit into that category, is a lot of ants crawling around the trunk.
Right.
Those ants are harvesting that honeydew.
Right.
They're eating that sugar. So it's kind of a cycle there where they're feeding on the honeydew, taking it back to their nest, feeding their babies. But but the main thing is if you see a lot of ants, you probably got some scale insects on.
So it's
that.
good for the ants, but it's bad for our crepe myrtles.
Not so good on our crepe myrtles.
Well,
as this goes, I mean, you'll get this particular one's probably 6 months infested, maybe a year infested.
Right.
You start seeing that black all over the trunk, not just on the leaves. It's really easy to see in the wintertime once the leaves fall off is that black sooty mold.
Right. Or there's another picture. You can see it on the bark of the tree that's not covered up by the leaves as it drifts down.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was talking about. A winter shot where we don't have leaves. We see a lot of black on there. Right. So bad insect. Again, I think about my best estimate is about half of our crepe myrtles that we have in town are affected with crepe myrtle bark scale of some sort.
Well, I know just driving around town, sometimes you'll notice outside of a housing development or something, they have a whole row of crepe myrtles down there, and you look, and they all
look black.
They all are black,
Yeah,
that's just spread. That's kind of an incubator to spread to other crepe myrtles.
That's right. And they're not moving much in the wintertime. I mean, we get some warm days that they may feed a little bit. But for the most part, they're kind of dormant. I don't like to use that word, but they're kind of dormant a little bit in the wintertime.
Right.
Spring times when they really start, just like everything else growing outside, they'll really start activating essentially.
Right.
They'll come out of that shell, start crawling around, start finding another place to mate and start a new life cycle essentially in the spring.
Well, I know myself, my neighbors headed across the street from our house, and so I kept watch. And then sure enough, one day I went out there and saw it, but it was just confined to one branch.
Yeah.
So that's like an easy removal.
Yep.
Get
Snip
rid of
and
that
go.
branch, and
Yep.
it was good to go. But where did this come from?
It's kind of an odd deal. It hadn't been around that long. I think 2004 we found it in Dallas. So blame it on Texas.
Well,
blame it
of
on
course.
Texas.
Absolutely.
2004 we had a landscaper that kind of came across of it, and then we got the Texas A&M involved and kind of got some studies done, and it's another type of scale that has just shown up. It actually come from China, is where they think they traced it back to.
All right. Well, we've got a map here that kind of shows the distribution here in the United States. And you're right, it is kind of confined to this southern portion of the United States, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas.
The green counties are the one that have been confirmed, but there's a lot more I know out there that we just haven't confirmed. I mean, this one is July 2nd of this year in 19, but it's pretty solid, and it's a big problem we have.
Right. So if you've got it, what do you do about it?
So now the big question is how do you control it?
That's
I mean, a lot of the times it's kind of similar to what our scale control is going to be, where we use dormant oil in the wintertime.
Right.
Dormant oil is a thick oil that covers and coats that particular felt or that insect, suffocating them. Right. So in theory, sounds good, but man, you saw in those pictures how many they are. It really takes some diligence to get them fully coated. Right. It's not like they're going to walk through an insecticide, take that up, and kill them. Right. You've got to get it on them, and it's got to coat them enough to suffocate them.
Well, and they call it dormant oil because it's thicker, and you only want to use it on dormant plants.
That's correct.
Because otherwise it'll smother them or damage the leaves. You wouldn't want to spray this dormant oil on a plant that's got leaves.
That's right. Leaves that are out there, it's designed to coat and suffocate. So we've got some summer oil that's a little thinner oil, but it's not as effective. It just needs to be covered in the wintertime with that dormant thick type oil.
Right. Well, I've also heard one of the recommendations is you can grab it. You can get the branch, depending on the outbreak, how much you have, you can get a stiff brush and a bucket of soapy water and get out there and scrub them off physically. But, I mean, that's going to get pretty tedious pretty fast. And if you've got a crepe myrtle that's taller than you are, which most of them are, that doesn't seem like a good plan A.
I've got kids at home and busy in the evenings, and I don't feel like going out and scrubbing my crepe myrtle
No, I
too
know.
much.
When I was reading that, it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to do that. Well, let's see what plan B is.
Some of you crazy gardeners could probably do that and spend about an hour or two,
No,
but
that's okay.
that's okay. I mean, to one is each own, or whatever they say. But it can be done. Actually, mechanically removing with a scrubby brush. How about that? A brush that scrubs that off.
A stiff bristle brush.
Yeah. And it can work. I like the dormant oil. I like that in wintertime when we lose our leaves.
Right.
I would like to see that done about every month.
In the winter?
In the winter, probably starting December, January, and February, and even March.
Right.
So that's 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 applications, making sure that you're going to get it good and covered.
Right.
So that's one option that we have is kind of the dormant oil suffocation.
Is there a chemical option for
There are. We need to kind of wait until, you remember I mentioned about when they were crawling in the springtime. They tend to get outside that felt, and when they start doing that, we can put a contact insecticide on at that point. Bifenthrin. Bifenthrin is one that tends to work pretty good. It's fairly safe, and it's pretty targeted. So those soft-bodied scales, when they get out and start crawling, we get bifenthrin or any other type of landscape insecticide that should, since they're soft-bodied, should control them pretty easily.
So bifenthrin that you're mentioning there, that's the actual name of the ingredient, not the product. You'd have to go to the store and look for a product that had that as an ingredient.
Correct.
Right?
So yeah, you're going to have to look at the fine print and find bifenthrin as an active ingredient.
Take your magnifying glass.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I did say fairly easy once they get to crawling. There's nothing easy about controlling these guys.
Right.
They're not all going to come out of that shell at the same time. So you're going to have some's going to come out now, then another couple weeks, then a couple weeks. So it's going to be kind of a continued process. Right. But we can use that bifenthrin or insecticide, that contact insecticide, throughout the season as we see the crawlers.
Right. Well, one thing we know for sure is they're everywhere. You can just drive around town and see them, the parks and yards, and it's almost unusual to see one that if you don't see
doesn't
it,
have it.
If you don't see it now, you likely will see it because it's on the move. And
that's exactly right.
It's pretty robust.
There's been some talk also about systemic insecticides. Systemic insecticides usually work pretty good. Some of the issues that we're having with some systemics is that we don't know if it's going to transfer into our pollinators to our pollen. So for right now, Oklahoma, we're not recommending systemics for controlling scale, these crepe myrtle bark scale. There may be some safer alternatives that come out, or some alternatives that aren't quite gonna get into the pollen.
That's a negative effect.
That's kind of a negative effect.
Right.
Those products are labeled for scale, but for right now, Oklahoma State University is not recommending systemics.
Right. And when you say systemic is like you buy a concentrate, mix it up in a bucket for their recommendations, and then you pour it around the base of the plant or shrub, and it gets absorbed up into it. So it would essentially be killing them from the inside. They're protected in that shell.
That's correct.
But then they're not protected when they're
when they suck the
juice, and the juice carries the pesticide.
That's
and will
correct.
Get them.
That's
but
correct.
then it'll also go up into the flowers and
that's correct.
Perhaps
that's correct.
So
like holly, holly gets some scale, armored scale.
Right.
There's not a lot of flowers on the holly bush essentially.
Right.
So a systemic would work pretty well on that because we're not too worried about transferring that systemic insecticide to our pollinators or to our bees. So hollies and other type of landscape plants, that systemic can work pretty well on that. Just be careful and be aware that if they are flowering and we have treated them with some systemic, there could be a chance that we transfer that through the pollen.
Right. Well, that sounds good. And Brian, our pest of the week this week is every year. Every year we don't necessarily see them like this, but we see the damage coming from these guys.
Moles and gophers.
Moles and gophers.
Moles and gophers. I think anybody that has a yard or has a garden or that's out there will come across moles or gophers, and they're a challenge.
Well, and sometimes it seems like they're gone, we're doing fine, and then all of a sudden, bang! Here's some damage from one of them.
Just when you think you got them under control.
Just when you think you've moved past that.
They bring you right back down to reality.
Right, so moles and gophers here. We got gopher here on the side. Like I think when we were talking earlier, you're saying we're never going to see either of these
Yeah,
like this for the most part.
Thank goodness. I mean, you'll see some every now and then. You'll see a cat bring one up or
Right.
things, but for the most part, they're going to stay under the ground where they're feeding. And
That's their home. That's where they want to be.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, you got moles and gophers, pocket gophers to be specifically. Gophers eat grain and grass is kind of what I like to say. Moles eat meat. Right. So there are two different animals, two different critters. The control's different. They look different. Their damage is different. Right. So that's one thing we've got to do up front is to figure out which one we have. One of the tricks is we may have both of them. So they may be running interchangeably, but we've just got to kind of figure that out, and then we can kind of go from there.
The correct diagnosis, I know we've had people that'll say, well, the moles are destroying my plants. Well, not necessarily. It might not be the moles. It's likely the gophers that are.
That's correct. Since they're eating grain and grass and roots, that's what they're eating. They'll eat a little bit of insects, but for the most part, those gophers are going to be eating plants.
Right. Well, and then a difference between the critters here, you'll notice the mole. Those hands are built for digging. You can those are big digging paws. They let them dig those tunnels and move around the yard. And that little snout. I mean, it just seems like a custom built for digging.
It does, and I mean that hand, that arm takes up. It's bigger, almost as big as his head.
Oh,
so
really?
I mean they're rolling through. Size of these guys, the gopher is kind of a small cat. So he's a big fella. She's a big fella. So she, and the mole's going to be smaller. He's going to be more size of your hand. So maybe a quarter of the size of the gopher. But again, you won't hardly ever see the critters themselves. So it's the damage that we see. So let's go to the next one.
Yeah,
Kind of get
speaking
in
of damage.
Yeah, so this one is a gopher mound, a pocket gopher mound. So that what's happened, his tunnel is a little deeper in the soil.
Right.
So he's pushing that dirt up. Tighter soils, the more pockets of dirt you'll have.
Oh.
The looser soils, they don't have to push it up as much. They can push it around the tunnels. So as they're digging, they can either push it aside or push it up out of the ground. And that's what we're getting here on the mound for that gopher.
I know sometimes now just driving down the highway, maybe in a schoolyard or something, you'll see 15, 20 of these holes, and I mean, they're pretty prevalent.
Yeah. So that may be tighter soil. That soil may be tighter, and where they're having to push it up quicker. So that particular one is a gopher. So let's go. You want the key? Gopher key.
Gopher key. That's a sure sign. You can tell if you see their keys. If they left their keys outside the tunnel,
then they're there.
You know it's a gopher.
But
that's just there for scale.
The size may vary. It may vary from 6 to 8 inches in across to 2 feet. So it all really depends.
So identification, this is a gopher.
Correct.
And then this is a mole.
So this is a mole. The moles, you won't see pockets of dirt. You'll see the tunnels where they've lifted that up. They don't have to push that dirt up because that tunnel's right on that surface. Right. So you'll see that enlarged tunnel pretty much net-like all throughout our yard, just where it's raised up, and they're traveling as a highway right underneath that ground, underneath that surface.
Yeah, and maybe not as noticeable if you've got grass. You may not notice it in the grass, and maybe like you roll in the yard and you feel it rather than see it with your eyes.
Or you see some yellowing in stripes, and you get a little closer inspection. That yellowing is because they've lifted that grass up and it's drying out. That first inch or two soil dries out, so you may see yellowing there. So, or you trip and fall because of that tunnel, or you twist your ankle. That's more than likely because of that mole tunnel. So again, moles right below the surface. You see the tunnel. Gophers, you see pockets of dirt.
Right. And we call them pocket gophers. They're called pocket gophers because essentially they've got these little pockets beside their cheeks. So when they're out digging for food, trying to find the roots, they can actually store some food in there and take it back with them.
Take it back to their babies, or save it for labor or whatever.
Yeah, so that's the reason pocket gopher is for those pockets alongside the face.
Yep. So back to it. Moles eat meat. Gophers eat grain and grass.
M&G, moles, meat, gophers, grain, and grass. That's a good way to remember it.
Their teeth also are a little different. The carnivore teeth like ours, will be with the moles since they eat meat. The gophers, they'll have chisel beaver-like teeth where they go in and dig those roots out, chisel those roots out that way.
Right.
But moles will have more teeth like ours.
Right. So we've identified them. We've found out whether we have a mole or a gopher. what do we do
How do
about
we
them?
control these damn things? Yeah, so that's kind of the point. This is kind of what we're after. So, a couple versions. You can kind of go to the next slide. Traps will work for both of them. Labor intensive. I don't necessarily like traps because I'm not patient enough. You know, you get some folks out there that are, you know, a true gardener that likes to set the traps and wait, and not necessarily stare, but just put them out there and then come back and check them every few hours. Some traps have a signal where they've been tripped,
flag
a fly up, or you know, or you just get in there and dig to see if you've tripped that trap. But gopher traps work pretty well. You know, you've got to get down in. This particular one is a spring trap where you dig a hole by that mound that we were looking at earlier, find that underground tunnel, and you actually put that trap inside that tunnel. Okay. So it takes a little bit of finagling and a little bit of getting down in there, but once you get that in there, then the idea is them to walk through that tunnel, trip that trap, kind of like a mouse trap. Once it's tripped, it'll catch them or spear them and get them that way.
Right. So we dig the hole to put the trap in. We want to put something across that hole to keep it dark.
That's correct. So they don't think that anything's been messed with.
They don't think anything's wrong.
Yeah.
But you'll notice in the picture we've got two traps facing different directions because basically we're not sure which direction.
Don't know if they're coming in one way or
they're coming
the other.
from. So typically to do the best job, two traps. And just from personal experience, I kind of show it there, but tie a string or a cord to the trap and anchor it to something on top because I've lost.
Oh, because you've lost the trap
because maybe depending on where it got them, they're gone.
Drug it away.
Your trap is gone, and you don't know if you got them or whatever. So I've got a cinder block.
Yeah, that you tie it on.
Tie it around there, and leave the cord kind of loose, and then I look out there and see if the cord's like taut to the
got
hole.
something on that string.
Like somebody hit it, and then you can go out there and see if you actually.
So I haven't necessarily used these particular ones. I love grain. I love poison grain to feed these guys. Basically, what you do, there's a couple different types of grain. It's usually wheat and sorghum that has the poison over, coated in it. Right. So then you simply take a dowel rod, and then you find where that tunnel is with that dowel rod. So you start stabbing around that mound till you feel a give, and that give means that's where that tunnel or that void in that soil is. So you pull that dowel rod out, and then that grain usually has a cone on it. You cut the tip of the cone off, you dump some grain in there, and then you lightly fill that hole that you was talking where it doesn't look like that has been disturbed.
Right.
Yeah. So the grain works pretty well. I like the smaller grain better than what you call poison peanuts or poison pellets. They seem to be bigger. I mean, they work as well, but I like the small grain. It seems to be more natural for them, and they seem to get it. But poison grain works fairly well. That's my version of the way I like to control them with that poison grain.
Now we're talking about putting poison out in our yard. What about pets?
That's always a concern.
Right.
Whether that rodent consumes that, and then that bobcat or fox or dog comes in and eats that carcass.
Oh, right.
Luckily, they're underneath the ground. Right. So hopefully you don't have a curious dog or something like that comes in and tries to dig it up, just to be safe. But that's enough grain, enough poison to kill that particular rodent, not necessarily a 20-pound dog or a 10-pound dog. But you do want to use caution if you do have animals in the backyard, or you've got a lot of wildlife back there that could consume that. So
if your
it's
dog's
an issue.
A digger, then maybe.
Yeah. And then birds as well. I mean, you get raptors and hawks and things that's always scouring around. But the good thing is when they do die, they die under the ground. They don't usually come up to die. So usually they're hidden and we go on with it. But if you are concerned with the poison, then you want to go with the trap route. And it'll be fine. It'll be a little more labor intensive, but it can work. It can work fine as well.
So on the trap, you've solved the problem if you catch a gopher. On the poison, I guess you've solved the problem when you stop seeing mounds.
If it don't show up as much, that's right.
If it doesn't show up as much, or at least maybe it moved on to the neighbor's yard, and it's still a mission accomplished.
One thing on those is they are pretty territorial. So, you may think your backyard, which is probably, 6,000, 8,000 square feet, you may only have one mole or gopher in that area. Right. They tend to fight each other off. They tend to stay in one area. Right. So that's a good thing for us, where we can go ahead and trap or kill one, and then we may not have any for a while, but then some more come in. Blame it on your neighbors.
Well, plus the pathways, the road's already there.
They're there.
The road's already there, and they follow the road, and there's nobody here. I found a new home.
That's right. That's right. So one thing also is don't disturb that as much as possible. Try, don't go out there and try to, smash down all of those mounds and things. We want to keep that as undisturbed as possible until we kill them, and then we can go in and clean that up and straighten it out.
Yeah. So good tips on gophers. What about moles?
So moles is similar. We have traps for moles as well, but we also have poison worms,
like
and
these
I think
guys,
those guys. So you can find that at hardware stores. Your local hardware stores, your local garden centers will have these poison worms. Various names. Usually the ones we find at the garden centers are going to be packaged in packages of like 2 or 3, versus a commercial brand or a commercial brand that may have packages of 10, and the reason I say that is because they kind of have a shelf life. If we break that seal, open it up, they tend to lose their smell.
Or dry out
a little bit. So we want to use as fresh as possible. So if we buy a package of 10 and use 3, and then they sit on our shelf for 4 to 6 months, then we may be wasting our money because they won't be as effective and they may not go to it. So keep that in mind. But these are poison worms. They contain enough poison to kill that particular rodent. This particular one's for moles. Tomcat mole killer is one that comes to mind. Commercial version is talprid, that a lot of commercial folks will use, but these work pretty well. They work pretty well. I think the trick on these is to find an active tunnel, an active run. You'll have tunnels, they may have been there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The moles may not be going back through there.
They've already harvested there.
They've already gone and foraged, and they're...
Because they're looking for worms and stuff to
they're
eat.
feeding.
Yeah.
They're feeding. So one trick is to find that active one. And if we come back and see it's fresh, then we know it's pretty active, so we can treat that particular one. But if not, one of the tricks that I've done is poke a hole in that tunnel. Poke a hole in that tunnel, leave it exposed where light gets in there. Then they'll come back through and patch it. And then if they come back through and patch it, we know they're back there. So we can
active run.
So then we can go back and put that worm in there and go on. So
and these, we say they eat worms and things. This is a bait that kind of mimics their natural food source, what they're looking for. So
it has that smell. One other caution is wear a glove, not for poison for us, but for human scent. The human scent can get on that worm and they can kind of push it aside. Or I've even seen them push that worm back up that hole. They're mad.
Try again.
Yeah, ha, you're going to get this back up there. But when that was human scent or just something they didn't like. But if you look real close, it kind of has that cutellum on an earthworm.
It looks like a worm.
It looks like worm.
Especially in the dark.
Yeah, definitely. And it's dark down there.
Dark in the tunnel, it's going to feel like a worm.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. But
the color wouldn't matter.
They're feeling a lot.
Well, that's right.
Eyesight's horrendous.
Yeah, it would be if you were spitting your life.
But and another thing, definitely on the tunnels, you don't want to disturb those tunnels. You have a tendency to go in and try to smash them down so our yard looks better. But if we're trying to control, try to leave it as undisturbed as we can. And then once we notice that we're not seeing any new ones, then we can go through there and pack it back down and go on. So just more caution. So the next slide.
Yeah, what about these
traps?
Guys?
These are harpoon traps. These are mole traps, and you can kind of tell right there that this goes in kind of straddles that mound, that tunnel, and so you pull that up. It's got a spring loaded. It has a catch, so you pull it up and it catches, and then this particular latch goes right against that soil line, and as that mole goes and pushes up that soil, it pushes that latch, bam, spears them that way. This is fairly easy. It's not as accurate as the gopher traps, but it can work. Hopefully it goes in, they spear and it gets them that way, and they're not going to run off with this one. So it's going to be at the ground. It's probably an 8-inch apparatus, but it works pretty well. Again, just like our gopher traps, it's a little more labor intensive where you'll have to go back and check. So we've got wildlife services or pesticide companies that will go out and have a mole and gopher eradication or control. Eradication's a bad word because you're never going to be able to eradicate them. you're just going to be able to control them for a while. So they're going to tend to do the poisons because they can set it and forget it, or they can put it in the hole and walk away. Whereas a trap, they may have to come back 24 hours later, and they've got 50 clients, and they don't necessarily have time to get back by there to reset that trap or gather that trap up. So they tend to use the poison grain and poison worms as well. Yep. So moles and gophers is a tough one. The main thing again is to ID them, figure out which one you have, whether it's a mole and gopher, and then figure out how you want to treat them. And then you kind of get that plan of attack down. And then once you do that, just stay on them. You're going to be battling them throughout the year. They tend to slow down in the wintertime a little bit. They don't hibernate, but they tend to slow down a little bit.
Don't see it as much.
No, but then in springtime they start mating, and then it really gets active because they start feeding and going. A couple interesting facts: they can tunnel 300 feet a day on the moles.
Can't we all?
Tunnel 300 feet, so that's a football field.
Right.
So they're foraging. Their system, they have to eat. They have to metabolize a whole fast. They have a fast metabolism, so they have to eat their body weight during the summertime, basically every day.
Which is incredible. I'm glad we don't do that.
We'd be fat, wouldn't we? But their metabolism's so fast that they have to forage and have to go out and eat. So that's one of the reasons they can do that football field today. And you get some nice, healthy, lush, good soil, good grass, lawns. That's perfect for them because it's harboring earthworms. It's harboring white grubs a little bit, but for the most part, the moles are eating earthworms.
Well, that's something we always hear. I must have a lot of grub worms because I've got a mole problem. Not necessarily is what I do.
Not necessarily. I mean, we have a lot of grub worms out there and they'll eat them, but the earthworms are probably more numerous and they probably like them a little better.
Their primary diet.
Yeah, so people say, well, kill the grub worms and you'll have less moles. Yeah, and that may be the case. But any of the grub worm killers or pesticides will also kill our earthworms. Earthworms are very, very tender. They are very susceptible to poisons. Right. So I don't like to kill the grub worms to control the moles. I'd rather attack the moles themselves than what they're feeding on.
Right. Well, I know just myself. People talk about having moles. It's like, well, you must have good, healthy soil.
Correct.
Because if you've got moles, they're there for a reason because you've got worms in there. They're not going to be there eating if there's nothing there to eat.
Correct.
And then there's also with the moles, you don't necessarily have to do anything about them. They can kind of aerate the soil, loosen up the soil, unless there's a problem, unless they're really tearing up your yard, you wouldn't have to do anything. I know in my yard, I've got a few moles and we kind of coexist.
Yeah.
We don't worry about it. If they get out of hand.
But once they get to that threshold, it's like, I'm going to get you.
Well, we talk about it first, and then we negotiate.
You give them a chance.
We negotiate, and there's only one end to the negotiation. Anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, lots of good.
But yeah, it is, but you will have to just kind of stay on them. It's one of those that you just kind of got to be aware, and then you may kill them, and they may be gone for a couple months, right. Or they may show back up after a couple weeks. So, and where do they come from? Aliens bring them in, I guess. Who knows? Again,
you write that down.
Aliens drop them in, but no, the neighbors, and they've survived this long for a reason, right. And they'll continue to survive.
Right, and I know sometimes with the moles, you'll see the mound, and then it'll go to like the curb or something, and they'll be going down the curb.
Fall down that curb.
Down the curb, to avoid having to dig.
Or your house foundation. That's a great place to set that trap because you kind of got a straight run, and you kind of know they're going to go from this part of the yard to the flower bed, and the only way they can get there is through that foundation run. So that particular one works pretty well to treat. Another damaging thing is indirect damage is from wildlife. Wildlife will go in and
digging them out, looking for
them? Not necessarily the moles and gophers, but they'll be digging the earthworms and the white grubs. So again, a healthy lawn brings in earthworms, brings in more wildlife. So like possums, like armadillos, like skunks, that they can kind of dig and forage for the earthworms too, and the things. So that's again a true sign of a good healthy turf is all of this activity. Not necessarily good activity for us if we're trying to keep a good lawn, but wildlife can be an issue on having extra white grubs and earthworms in there.
Right.
Yep.
Well, lots of good information there on moles and grubs. Hopefully be some strategies in there for people to work in their yards.
Little bit of a longer explanation, but I think it's one that's justified because
we all battle it for the most
that's
part.
right.
It's something we all face.
That's right.
Hydrangeas, yeah, it's one of our favorites. I mean, it blooms pretty much season long.
Right.
We've got new ones that will do bloom on new wood. A lot of talk in the office. Does it bloom on new wood or old wood?
Right.
Some of the newer varieties will bloom on new wood and old wood, so that will allow us to have flowers pretty much throughout the season.
Well, I know we get people that come in their questions and they'll say, well, I trimmed my hydrangea back last year and I didn't get any blooms this year. Well, odds are it was one of those varieties that blooms on the old wood. So if you cut off the old wood,
you've cut off
you've cut off all your blooms.
Yeah.
And it's tempting to do that because they just look kind of little sticks sticking out there, and it's not very pleasant in your garden. But leave those if you've got that variety.
If you
the key is know what variety you have.
That's right. That's right. If you want to hear me stutter and trying to answer a question of why my hydrangeas aren't flowering.
Right.
Because there's quite a few different things that it could be. Fertilizer is probably the first thing that comes to mind. Us as homeowners have a tendency to over-fertilize. Mm-hmm. When a plant's over-fertilized, it's growing vegetatively. It's not worried about producing flowers. It's comfortable in its life cycle. It's not worried about reproducing, so it's not going to put more flowers on. So if we're heavy in nitrogen, it's going to grow a lot of foliage, not a lot of flowers. So that's my first answer for why is your hydrangeas or other plants not flowering. Another one would be that too much shade. These hydrangeas, they're big leafed. Most of them have big leaves, so they're going to need a little bit of shade. Afternoon shade is a great thing to say on most of these hydrangeas. Now, some can handle full sun, but they're going to do the best when they're protected in the summertime from about 3 till 7 or 8 in the afternoon during that heat.
I know in my yard I've got several hydrangeas, and at July, August, where it's 102 or whatever, I'll look out there and they'll just be.
They start drooping
they're just
down,
like
wilting
drooping
down.
and looking terrible. But you wait till sundown and you look out there and they'll be coming back up. It's those big leaves, that transpiration.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're losing water faster than they can suck it up.
Yeah, and we've grown them a bunch throughout, May and June, trying to get a lot of foliage out there, and sometimes we put too much, and that's what's happened. We've grown them too much in the May, June time, and then July and August comes, and they just start wilting, and sometimes they'll wilt enough to burn on the outside of the edges. So if we are doing that, it may be too much sun. Or it could be just the tendency of it to, we could have some 100-degree weather that just drying them out. It just can't pull up enough water to cool itself down.
They're just in survival mode.
That's right. But hydrangeas are great. There's a lot of different sizes, shapes. Kind of a unique characteristics is you can change the color on a few of them.
That's another one of the questions.
Oh, there you go.
Mine are pink, or I wanted blue ones or whatever. Did I buy the wrong ones? Well, you can shift it with the pH.
Yeah, you can. So on the pH, we've got a lower pH, so around the 5.5s, and help me if I'm wrong. I think if we're on
that'll
5,
be the blue. The
that
blue
would be the
lower
blue.
pH.
So a low pH, an acid soil is going to have a blue color to it. And then if we raise that pH, getting into the 6s and 7s, it will have a tendency to be pink.
Right.
So, and we can switch them, and in some cases, that plant can have 2 different colors at one.
Depending on
how wide.
How good a job
big.
you did on sprinkling. But you can go to the nursery or the garden center, and you can actually buy a container, blue hydrangeas, pink hydrangeas. And it's got all the stuff in there, and you can dump that out there and help shift the pH in the direction you want it to go.
So sulfur lowers pH. So anytime if we're going from pink to blue, we put some sulfur on there.
Right.
Ballpark around 100 square feet, about
2 pounds of sulfur for 100 square feet. So that's going to lower us down a little bit. And on the other end of that spectrum, we're going to raise soil pH with lime. So on that, we put about 8 to 10 pounds per 100 square feet of lime. It's going to take a little while. It's going to take 3 to 6 months depending on your soil type and how it's made up, but it will eventually change it and change some colors on those. So yeah, it's kind of a fun thing about hydrangeas.
It's not one of those that you buy the color change and you go out and sprinkle
Just go out and sprinkle it on it.
Go out the next morning and expect it to be a different color.
But I'd go out to the nurseries. These are, everybody needs a hydrangea. There's usually an area in your flower bed that's shady enough, or afternoon shade. Hydrangeas will be a good choice. They love high organic matter, well watered, well drained. They will do great. But
and fall.
Fall's a good time as well. Fall, planting right now is a good time for those as well. Nursery stock's getting, they're going to have some good deals out the nursery. But I think you'll love a hydrangea. Lots of sizes, shapes. I think the next slide.
Well, it's the one we tend to forget a lot of times when we're talking hydrangeas, but it's the oak leaf hydrangea.
Oak leaf, yeah, oak leaf's cool. It's one that'll handle full sun. That you can plant it out directly. But these flowers will tend to stay around all winter. They'll use them for dried arrangements throughout the winter as well. But great plant. Again, different sizes. You can get up to 6 to 8 foot tall on the full size oak leaf, or you can get kind of a peewee version that doesn't get much more than 2 foot tall. So just like any other varieties, they do well. But again, this one does good on old wood. It flowers good on old wood, so we don't want to do a lot of pruning on that. But like I said earlier, the newer varieties like Endless Summer, there's quite a few different newer varieties that will bloom on new wood, and that can help us as well.
Right. One thing I forgot to mention on the other variety of hydrangeas, sometimes a hard freeze. If we have a really cold winter, since they do bloom on old wood and those buds are already set
up high.
If they freeze those, you're not going to get any flowers.
Yeah.
So we got weather, we got pH, we got all these things.
There's a lot of different issues that it could be, and pruning. Just be careful about pruning too much on any of them. I've got one that's about waist high, and it doesn't flower very well, but it's on the north side of my house, and it doesn't get a lot of sun, and I think that's what I blamed. My wife was asking me a month ago why isn't it blooming, and it just doesn't have enough sun. So I've got a choice whether I want to pop it out of the ground, and it's big, whether I want to pop it out of the ground and move it to a sunnier location, or just kind of live with what it is. And I'm living with it right now until
the scales are tipping.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But why is the hydrangea not blooming? That's a fun, tough question, and it's a harder question. But I start with fertility, then I go to sun, and then I ask about your pruning. So there's quite a few things that it could be, and sometimes, who knows? It just may not. It may not be happy there for some reason, and it may not ever flower like you would like it to. So if that's the case, pop it out of the ground, move it to another location, and see. And then if that doesn't work, pull it out and get another one.
Yeah, good plant.
Don't give up on it.
Looks great. Got to have one. Got to have one or two in your yard. Right now, we're talking about leaves. The thing is, don't do this. Do not bag up those leaves and either let them haul them off to the dumps or the trash site that we have here in Tulsa.
Yeah, I mean, their leaves are down right now. I mean, they're still falling, but for the most part, they're on the ground, and usually we can get in and mulch them. That's free mulch. It's free fertilizer. That's free added nutrients to our soil that we don't want to necessarily ship off. And if we get too big of a pile, if we can't get them all mulched in and it hides the leaves of the fescue, then we can go ahead and get those off, put them in a bag, move them to the backyard, but mulch them in. I think this was your yard.
This is my yard. We've got probably 40 to 50 of these big oak trees, and we get a lot of leaves.
Yeah.
When we first moved into our house, I bagged them all up, and mulched bagged leaves, we had 120 bags. That's a lot of bags. That's like every weekend all season long.
That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Until going through this program, and Dr. Zhang, the soil scientist from OSU, talking about just mulch them in, and I was like, well, that'd be a lot easier, wouldn't it? So anyway, in this picture here, I let them kind of get ahead of myself last year. But this is just one pass with the lawnmower. You still see some leaves, but if I make another pass on that, they'll be gone. They'll be invisible. They'll be mulched up. They'll be down in the sand that's in the ground.
Yeah.
It's going to give more organic matter back to your soil. And as Dr. Zhang said, manure and leaves has the same amount of nitrogen,
That's
1% nitrogen, which is kind of hard to.
Yeah,
wrap
you
your head
think
around.
manure, you think it has a lot of nitrogen
Right.
in it, and it has a little, but leaves have just as much too.
Right.
So yeah,
So it's kind of free fertilizer falling from the sky that you can mow into your
and it's
yard.
good slow release fertilizer that it won't necessarily be available this first month, but it'll be available throughout the winter. And as spring starts breaking things down more, it's going to release a lot more.
Right.
And not just nitrogen. I think where our leaves, our positives on the leaves is our micronutrients and all those other smaller nutrients that we have out there. It's not just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but it's others out there that as it breaks down, it's going to release those in a form. But it is a good thing. We talked about fescue in a few episodes earlier, but it's not good for the fescue. The fescue won't do very good when it has leaf cover, when it's covered in leaves. So you may have to get in there every other week, go in and mulch that down, knock it down, get those leaves exposed. That's going to break down. That's going to cut it's also going to cut the fescue as well. So that's going to add our greens to our browns with our compost. So we're going to have a kind of a mini compost area out there, and then as the winter goes on and spring picks up, it's going to really release some pretty quick and pretty good. So my suggestion on this, and Tom, you've done it, it's your yard, is maybe around our sidewalks and in our flower beds where a lot of the leaves blow. They blow in the wintertime. So blow those out before. Mulch it in with that mulching mower, put it back in, and then you should be good to go. But
Well, it's changed my life. Another thing that's changed my life on these leaves is I bought one of these little mulchers, portable mulchers. You pick up the leaves and drop them down in there. So I'll get the leaves off of the driveway or the patio or something out there, run them through there. I'll get 15 or 20 bags of mulched leaves, store that in the corner of the yard for the winter, and then come spring when I'm getting my garden going, I've got my mulch.
Everything's ready
to go. I just got to go back to the wheelbarrow and bring it over and dump it out, and it's pretty pretty nice.
It works good. It really
good.
does, and you don't have to haul those off, and we like trees, and that's what happens in the wintertime. And
it's the downside to trees, but the upside is we can use them. That's what nature does. The leaves fall on the ground and we kind of recycle back through.
Yeah. So you're an example of you have a full covered forest in your backyard. 50 trees in the backyard and front yard, so there is a lot of leaves. So why pay somebody to get those leaves off? Run them with the mower a time or two throughout November, December. Then you're good to go. So save you about 300 or 400 to get have somebody come in and blow them out and gather them. You added your grass nutrients to that. So if you can, mulch them in. It's a better thing to do.
And I would much rather run the mower over a few times than put them in a pile and bend over and bag them up and carry them to the curb.
That's right. That's exactly right. And later on, if you've got them in a bag back in the backyard, hey, you can use those for mulch, use those for soil additives, and good to go, ready to go.
All right, so
on to business. That's not what I meant. I don't know what I meant.
I was trying to maintain it, but I look over there and Steve's like, so it's like, okay. Welcome to this edition of the Master Gardener Podcast. We're here in Tulsa, and Tom Ingram here with Brian Jervis.
Hello, y'all.
Hell y'all?
Hell, y'all. See? We've got that in our mind that we can cut and paste, and we don't do it well the first time. Take three. It's the ball that's messing us up.
Well, welcome to this edition of the Master Gardener Podcast. I'm Tom Ingram here with Brian Jervis. How ya?
I'm great. How ya? I'm great. You probably ought to put some of those stupid ones in there. Yeah. As long as you're stupid and not me stupid.
I don't think we have any of that.